Hi, welcome to Sessions with Bob and Lena. I'm Bob Gordon.
And I'm Lena Derhali, and this is Couples in COVID, Nowhere to Go.
Can you relate? So, some of you will be seeing this for the first time. Some of you will be hearing it as usual. You probably didn't hear the usual intro music because we don't have the technology with us to do that. Um, but otherwise, things should be about the same. And how about a little context? We have moved this to Zoom, and as I said, we're doing it visually. But if you want to, well, not for those of you on SoundCloud or Apple Podcasts, without the visual of us, we'll also post this on YouTube. So just do a search on YouTube for Sessions with Bob and Lena, and there will be only one so far. It'll be this one, and you can find it there. Lena, so I think it might be good for people to know, like, we suffer too, that therapists and experts are not immune either to the virus or to the social effects of it. What's going on for you? And then I'll talk about what's going on for me.
Yeah, I mean, I always have a very hard time complaining because I consider myself to be an incredibly privileged person, especially in comparison to, the rest of the world, to be quite frank. So I always have a problem saying, what's going on with me. Not that I don't have bad days, because I do, but
Right.
one of the things that I think maybe one of the biggest struggles I face is not really about myself, but feeling very helpless and very depressed and powerless over the mass suffering that's happening.
Yeah.
To people that are losing their income, to people in refugee camps where COVID is running rampant. They don't have anything even close to what we have in terms of medical care and clean water even sometimes. And so I think that's constantly, for me, in the back of my mind and colors my view on the world. So I think that's one of just the biggest existential struggles that
How are you handling it? What do you do when it feels overwhelming?
yeah, I think I just have an incredible amount of guilt. I feel guilty that, I get to sit in my house and I can order fancy takeout if I want to, or, you know, um, I think some of the ways I deal with that is, I donate to places that make me feel like I'm, maybe contributing something. Um, but other than that, a lot of it is just having to tolerate that, and just kind of go through those feelings, and
Right.
just constantly wishing I had the power to do more, or constantly asking myself, well, could I be doing more? What could I be doing?
Yeah.
What can I be doing to be in service to others? I mean, I'm doing definitely more pro bono counseling and lowering my fees for people.
Mhm.
So that's one way I've been dealing with it. How about you?
Same, same in terms of uh, survivor's guilt, for lack of a better word. I'm so aware of how lucky and privileged, fortunate, whatever the word I am, that I have a pension, from many years with the government. I took an early out, but I would still survive on that, and that my work has been able to kind of jump seamlessly onto Zoom or other platforms so that I can still see clients, still have an income, and sit. I, like you, I'm just like, I'm not going to complain too much about being alone
Yeah.
and being in quarantine, because there's a lot of people who would love to be in quarantine and not catch this thing, and they can't. And they're not, I mean, I know we're all honoring them, but it's not like they're volunteers, many are hostages
Mhm.
to, living day to day. So, yeah, the guilt and looking for ways, like my way of dealing with it is pro bono work, is contributing, is staying active politically so that uh, we can change the system. Uh, and I know apparently nobody's ready for Bernie's big revolution, but at least that's on people's minds. And, that this has been kind of like pouring the paint on the invisible man, that this shows this pandemic, it's not really, it doesn't equalize everything. In fact, it really shows the inequities much more sharply. Uh,
Yeah, and even, I mean, just in terms of voting, most people don't vote. I mean, in a general election, 50% of people don't vote. So there's just a lot of disenfranchisement and
mhm.
a lot of disillusionment. So, it's hard. I think it's hard to, for me now, to look at it from
Yeah,
political stance, because I think that what's being represented isn't necessarily what people actually want. It's a certain subset of people that are making that choice.
yeah. Well, so if you didn't feel, I'm going to probe a little bit so so we can normalize maybe what other people are feeling. If if you weren't busy with the guilt, what is what else is personally affecting you or affecting you personally about this? Like, being being closed in with your family, or the
Yeah.
difficulties, loneliness, what else, even though we're both privileged?
Yeah, we have to put that aside for now, and and think about the other stuff that we are speaking to today, which is the challenges of being in close quarters with people that you're intimately close to. And my challenges are probably pretty similar to a lot of other people who are lucky enough to be able to stay at home.
Yeah,
And it's adjustment, as I think parents have depending on the ages of your children. There's really different concerns about that. So if you have really young children, and do you work? So there's some households where two parents are working. There's
yeah,
some households where two parents are working and they have really young children and they can't have childcare come in because of different concerns.
right.
So I think there's different stresses. So I fall more into the camp of, I have elementary school children who are not at an age where they can independently learn.
Yeah,
They need a lot of help. They need a lot of guidance. They can't just go on an iPad and, figure it out.
right.
Um, they do need instruction. They can, and so I've pretty much had to devote my life now to my children's school, which was not something that I had anticipated or planned for at all this year. I had much different plans, professionally.
Yeah,
And so all of that, of course, has had to go on the back burner
hmm,
because out of my husband and I have the flexible schedule.
yeah,
So he's got to focus on work and, bringing in the health insurance and the salary so we can, you
yeah,
know, provide for our family. And I will take the role of, the majority of schooling. But it's been challenging
mhm,
balancing that and still trying to, keep my practice, do work related to my book, which was released 4 months ago. So it's been challenging
yeah, yeah,
balancing all of those things. And it's very it feels sometimes very sacrificial, but at the same time, as I said, not without acknowledgement that I'm still incredibly lucky regardless of that. How about you?
I think the hardest thing for me is because I'm sheltering alone. I'm single, and uh, I mean, I have a relationship, but I am, we're not cohabitators or married. Um, And so I've been by myself for now over 2 months. And I think it's been less challenging than I would have thought. I've acclimated well, all
Mhm.
things considered. I don't really I'm not a person that generally gets bored. I can always find something to entertain myself. But I am a confirmed extrovert. So the lack of actual face to face human contact. I'm certainly doing a lot of Zoom, a lot of FaceTime. Um, but don't when my youngest adult son um, comes and delivers some groceries, I feel like I just want to grab him, and have a 20-minute hug. But because I can feel the absence of just physical contact, shaking hands, the casual hug.
Yeah.
And that said, planning, and this we can speak to later as well. Actually, we won't really be talking so much about the solo challenges today. We'll be talking more about the, couples in COVID. Um, but so when we get to the singles session, which will follow this up at some later point, I can talk about how we planning virtual dates and things like that. But yeah, that's been the challenge. You know, the the fear of it all, and the loneliness, I would say.
Yeah, it feels like there's two extremes. People are either lonely and craving physical contact, or they have too much physical contact and because they're with people all the time. Or if, again, if you're with young children like, to cuddle and touch a lot and be in your personal space a lot. So it feels like if you're alone, it's a completely different experience than being with um,
Yeah.
people, or your family, I should say, because if you're living with roommates, that's a different experience.
And that might be a good segue
Yeah.
into um, what we're about today, because I know you and I, with our couples and other individuals, that we're still those which we're still able to see online, and because I don't have kids at home that now need me to supervise their learning.
Mhm.
Um, uh, I have the time to see all my clients, but which is another thing I feel fortunate about. And I can also appreciate, hey, you get to be with your kids. That's got to be nice. So grass is greener. Uh, but certainly, some of the things I'm hearing about are exactly what you said. Uh, Kids are home, and how do we work? And sometimes sometimes there is no second parent, and a person still has a job to do. Sometimes there is a second parent, but with a much less flexible work at home schedule.
Mhm.
Or sometimes there's one parent who's not in quarantine because they're one of these, they're an essential worker.
Mhm.
But I think we're talking today about the people that actually are sheltering in place together,
Mhm.
and what's coming up about that. So yeah, I'm hearing the um, trying to get your work done, handling kids' schooling, um, several. I think maybe what I've personally heard more than anything else, both through what I've learned and what things I've heard through you, is couples who have pronounced differences in child rearing uh, methodologies. It
Mhm.
comes much more into focus, and much more conflict.
Yeah,
What
that's
about?
come up. And also, childless couples too may have different
Yeah.
responses to dealing with
Hmm.
the rules, the social distancing guidelines, whereas one person in the couple may take it very seriously and they feel like their partner's not taking it as seriously. So I find that that could be happening with childless couples and couples with children as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. I know I've heard from a couple of people like about that very thing
Yeah.
with kids, and you think you're literally protecting your life and your kids' lives, and the other person is just doesn't see it as contagious or as dangerous.
Hmm.
People are entitled to their own, levels of caution and wariness, except then you live together and you have kids together, and what do you do then?
Perhaps the biggest thing I've heard from other people anecdotally
Mhm.
is that they're so burned out that they don't, I mean, I don't even think they have time for their relationship. Even if they're seeing their partner all the time, you're still not seeing them and necessarily having quality time with them.
Right.
Everybody's taking on all these different roles that were much easier. This busy world we all live in with so many different roles, it was much easier when people had help, when they could send their kids to school, when they could have
Yeah.
um, somebody clean up after them, more options, for maybe more prepared meals. People are cooking from home a lot more just because of the circumstance, so people are cooking more, cleaning more, working, schooling their children, doing all of those things that they're not used to doing. And so it creates a level of burnout that they don't have time. They don't have time for themselves, let alone their relationships. So
Mhm.
even though they're living together in such close quarters, there's still not any real intimacy, I don't think. There's no real bonding or connection because everybody is burned out. That's what I think I'm hearing the most. Problems with couples and
You're
COVID.
saying even with childless couples.
Yeah, maybe a little bit less with childless couples because they don't have the added. And
Mhm.
I have childless couples that I know that they may have different stress, but I think that's not the case for them because they don't have children demanding their needs and having to provide
Yeah.
for their children and all of that. They can focus on each other much more. Actually, I think the childless couples, at least the ones that were doing well before this, are probably doing a little bit better now because they actually have more time together.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing anyway.
Yeah. Same. Unless the couple is really wobble
Right.
anyway, in which case although I have heard, I'm trying to remember who told me, might have been you, about a couple who may have been on the verge of separating, who have said, this has kind of thrown a dose of reality in life, immortality and
Yeah,
finiteness, and maybe we'll give it another chance.
that's happening too. There's been some articles out there about that people are rediscovering each other and choosing to quarantine with someone they may have broken up with or may have been separated with, and now they're and even some parents who are divorced are quarantining with their children, not with the expectation of getting back together, but just because it's the best thing for the family. So that's been interesting reading about some of those couples
Yeah.
with no intention to rekindle their relationship, but still living together as a family again. So there's all kinds of different things coming up. I've spoken to couples who are living with in-laws or their own parents because it's easier
Hmm.
because of certain situations. So there's situations where there's larger family units, so balancing the dynamics of living like with your in-laws, for example,
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
be very stressful for some people. So there's all kinds of different challenges that are coming up for couples now. So many different ones that are so much more exacerbated than ever before, I think.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm saying okay, like maybe we've got a good snapshot of the problem of so people are in close quarters, and if there's conflict, for some people it's worse. And we're not really talking today about the people who are the people that are saying, man, this is great, I could, you know and there are a few individuals I've seen like that, like, Bob, I feel guilty saying this, but I'm thriving, I love this. I mean, other than the suffering outside my doors, I could do this forever.
Yeah, some people are very happy with this situation and aren't looking to change anything anytime soon. For some people, it's really helped them slow down, and they needed that, and so.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but this isn't for those people
Yeah.
today.
If they're listening, I hope they can enjoy hearing about other people's suffering. But
Yeah.
so I wonder if we can move to couples in conflict. The what I think we've probably described some of what they're going through, but what they might be able to do about it.
Yeah.
Um, have have you? And I know some of this will come through our talking, but are there any things you've been using, learning, reading about that off the top of your head that you would offer as tips for getting through this?
Yeah, I was reading, an article, I think I sent it to you, as Forbes, I believe, where they were saying that the biggest communication issue with couples quarantined now is around sex and how important communication is, and that people are very dissatisfied with their communication with their partners right now.
Yeah,
And so, you know, how do you communicate effectively? I think first, having to deal with your own self-care and self-soothing first and foremost is very important, because
mm,
what I've realized in this quarantine is so many people do not have good skills to work out their emotional landscape, whatever's going on in the emotional landscape. They don't have the skills to work through that effectively. And when that happens, they take it out on other people. So I think that's a problem. You may already have somebody who's critical or doesn't know how to sort of do their own self-check or self-awareness. So people who take out their stuff on other people, it's usually the people closest to you.
mhm,
That has become so much more exacerbated
yeah,
because people are under tremendous amounts of stress. And for those who aren't, using their emotional intelligence and their skills, or haven't learned them, or aren't putting them into practice, you're really going to lash out at the people closest to you and
mhm.
potentially be more critical. So, I would first ask people to find ways to check in with yourself and be kind to yourself and figure out what's going on with you before you just blindly would take it out on somebody else.
So knowing that seems like a great place to start. I agree. Like self-regulation, self-soothing comes first, because if you start communicating from a place of uh, collapse or overwhelm, it's not going to go well.
And unconsciously too, I think, like when you're not aware of your stress or what exactly is going on and you start to project it and take it out on other people,
Mhm.
it's when we're operating unconsciously, which, in Imago, as we say, you want to bring the unconscious to the conscious.
Yeah, yeah,
So then that's what's going to help restore connection, at least one part of it. But
yeah.
would you say that I know that you're good with teaching people skills
Mhm.
related to this. So maybe you could share some tips with people about how to recognize what's going on
Mhm.
within them so they aren't taking it out on other people.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you the same thing. So I'll start and then ask you, what would you tell someone? So uh, knowing there's listeners out here that we don't get to see on a regular basis. So I know both of us when we work with our clients, are teaching them, whether it's couples or individuals, are coaching and training them in skills, both of de-escalating conflict with partners, communicating conflict differently, and self-regulation.
Mhm.
Where I start with a lot of individuals and couples is recognizing when you are activated or triggered. You know, and triggered's a big word, pop word these days, but the way I'm using it is when old conditioned wounds, childhood wounds, whatever, are triggered by somebody's words or actions, or could be a lot of things, and then that gets activated and acted out. in your relationships. So to me, it starts with awareness of, are are you in a reaction, and is that reaction current? Is it really about this? Is it really about what my partner said, or is it old and of, comes out of old trauma or old wounding? And one tip somebody gave me, it was the author of a book. I was taking a workshop. I can't remember the author's name, but the book was called The Flying Boy, I believe. Um, said, if you feel if you're upset and you're feeling a really strong charge in your body, like this is not just thoughts, but you feel it in your body. It might be pressure, it might be jitteriness, but there's a strong and unpleasant felt something in your body, a charge, as he called it. He said, 99 times out of 100, it's old. If you're feeling that upset, that it's really in your system, really in your body, assume it's old, and first do no harm. Like, do not act out. Do not try to, do not have that argument. Do not say those words when you're in that activated state. Mm-hmm. So I think step number one, delay until you can chill out. Mm-hmm. And because when you're in one of those states, and you can maybe validate this or add to it, you're confused. One of the highlights is the other person is dangerous, they're evil, and you're being victimized. That's how an activated state feels. And you better damn well defend yourself. And when we are that vulnerable, we're usually most ugly. That's when we fight back the hardest, and it ain't pretty. Mm-hmm. So I think the first thing I would say is, first, do no harm. Do not act when you're in that state. Go somewhere else. Go running. Take a walk. Mm-hmm. Breathe. And I'll talk about some specific, very simple breathing technique or two to just kind of get back to equilibrium. And I acknowledge, easier said than done. Mm-hmm. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely that's a big part of it is, and, I was reading again today, more couples experts saying that, you really want to try to stay away from criticism as much as you can. You want to really work on how you're expressing yourself to your partner. As we know in Imago, there is ways to talk about your own frustrations without criticizing another person. So that's, a really important skill. Yeah. Instead of, you didn't take out the garbage, just, it would be really helpful if tomorrow you could take out the garbage, like sort of that reframing of, even though you may be disappointed, angry, frustrated, you may feel like you're doing everything around the house and your partner never does anything. Mm-hmm. Still important to try to refrain from that type of criticism that's going to put the other person on the defense as well. Right. And I think adjacent to that is also being able to ask for your needs at a time like this, which I know I'm guilty of, is that I feel like there's so much stress that other people have that I really can't have too many needs right now. Mm-hmm. But I think that it's really important that if we don't address our needs, again, it's going to fester inside until it explodes one day. And so if you really feel like I'm about to lose my damn mind, I need to get out, you need to say to your partner, like, look, I need 30 minutes to go for a run, to go for a walk, to go pick up takeout, whatever it is that you need to do, but to be able to know when you need that. And, I'm working with some clients now about checking in with themselves about how they're feeling. Mm-hmm. Not too much, because sometimes it overwhelms people to be, they say it's too much to constantly be aware of how I'm feeling, but every so often, maybe once a day, maybe every few days even, to check in and be like, how am I feeling? Do I feel like I'm a simmering pot ready to boil over? And if so, what can I do now? I know a lot of people say that simply going out for fresh air helps reset them.
Yeah.
It's one of the few things that we can do right now. So I think the limited ways we can get our needs met that are, which in some ways is better. It simplifies things, that we're going back to this simple life where we don't have as much choice. But
Yeah.
looking at what we can do, what might be helpful is just checking in with ourselves and being able to ask our partner of that, and also granting our partner their needs as well when they ask. So it's sort of this mutual, both supporting each other's needs when somebody needs something that's going to help them manage whatever's happening within them.
So to paraphrase what you're saying, let me see if I'm hearing it right. Check in with yourself, know what you're feeling. It doesn't have to be constant, but periodically at least. So to know what you're feeling, and so to know if you need something to de-stress, to self-regulate, and then to ask for it. I would assume that's ask for it, don't demand it, but get out, can you deal with the kids for 20 minutes so I can just go out and
or what I say to my husband is, at some point today I need to do this, or I need, that's going to be happening at some point. But I'll say to him, let me know in your schedule when it would be convenient for me to do.
Yeah, that sounds great. And you said
it's a collaborative process, but
right, be in partnership, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And you also said watch the criticism, and I think I could not say that strongly enough. And criticism, I really like John Gottman's work, the marriage researcher and researcher and writer and couples therapist. I want to just refer our audience, go on the internet, do a search on John Gottman, Gottman, and the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Those 2 terms, put them together, and you'll see his list of the 4 behaviors. And we've talked about this in past podcasts, so I won't belabor it, but it's the 4 things: criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling, that if those 4 are together in your relationship, it's going to crash and burn at some point. And the way he describes those and defines them is important. So I don't want to just say, just go with criticism and defensiveness. There's some very specific ways those show up. For example, how he defines criticism is, it's not having a complaint, because we all get to have complaints. He said that the 4 horsemen usually enter after a harsh startup, what he calls a harsh startup instead of a soft startup. And I know you know this stuff, Lena, but bear with me because probably our listeners don't. But the harsh startup is, damn it, every time I blah, 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 you blah, 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 or could you please stop? So it starts out mean and it starts out harsh, as opposed to, could we talk about something? Because I'm in a state right now. Help me out here. And criticism is not having a complaint or a what's the word, a grievance that's spoken with dignity and humanity. It's impugning the person's character, and it's using absolutes and hyperboles. It's like, why do you always? Why do you never? What kind of person would blah blah blah? That leads to the second horseman, which is defensiveness. Because, and some people are defensive for no reason, but defensiveness, as Gottman defines it, is when you flip whatever the complaint is, you flip it on the other person. It's not me, it's you.
Right.
And we've certainly seen plenty of politicians, I won't name names, who, when they're confronted with one of their own failings, look for the first person to blame, the first whatever entity. So the kind of toxic defensiveness, because we're all defensive if somebody comes at us with a harsh startup, but what Gottman's talking about is when you simply won't hear or take a counsel with the feedback your partner is giving you. It's always their fault. or somebody else's fault.
Mhm.
And the third is contempt, which is pretty much what most of us would think it is. It's sneering. It's, oh, you're such an ass. Yeah, it's name calling. It's that look. I'm even doing a sneer that says, you disgust me, is so, so destructive. And the last one is stonewalling, which broadly is kind of a refusal to even communicate, to talk about it. Basically, paper in front of your face. I don't, talk to the hand, talk to the paper. So look those up, listeners and viewers, and see if you can extract them, particularly during quarantine time,
Mhm.
from your interactions, because they're so destructive. And the harsh startup, make a soft startup.
Mhm.
And I know, Lena, we've talked in the past about the imago technique, and I know it's too long and detailed to do a big description of it here. So when a communication is starting to get rocky, there are some things I tell clients to do, but are there any that, like, things that you use with clients that you haven't had a chance to train yet, to really do the couples work with yet?
I think
Nice.
what you mentioned before is obviously don't have an argument or have a heated conversation when you know that you're getting activated. So revisiting it, coming back to it later when you're calmer, when you're not in activation mode is important. I think for people who don't have imago training or couple skills training, just being able to listen,
Mm-hmm.
just listening to other people without having to give some kind of response unless they want a response from you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But listening and just trying to get where they're coming from, the empathy piece, which
Yeah.
try to imagine what it's like to be in their shoes, and that everybody's struggling, everybody has a different struggle, everybody has a different way of coping with a struggle, and it may be very different from yours, but it doesn't mean that it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Just trying to be patient with other people's differences, and trying to come out of your own ego,
Mm-hmm.
that your way of being is the only right way to be, and acceptance of other people's differences that may frustrate you, and just trying to be more curious about why those coping strategies work for that particular person. It may be different from yours, but it works. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think those are some of the basics that I would tell people without having to go into a whole analysis of imago. How about you?
So you're saying, listen, be ready and willing to listen. And if you see me looking off, I'm writing these things.
Yeah.
Listen, make an attempt to understand. I know we use a metaphor in Imago of crossing the bridge into where the other person lives. You can't live there with them, nor should you, but to be able to really get curious about crossing the bridge into the other person's world and not taking your luggage with you, like, go really try to understand. You said patience and acceptance with differences, that we're different. And I totally, ditto on that a lot of conflict comes out of, you ought to not think that. You ought to think what I think. I
Right.
mean, so much. I mean, for me, certainly, that you just can't accept that we can be very different about something. And nobody ever said it was supposed to be otherwise, but we act as if it's supposed to be otherwise, and you use the word curious, which is so important for me. Like, instead of defensive, instead of oppositional, curious. Be curious about the person. And sometimes that very intention can pull a person out of an activation or triggered state into that kind of empathy network in the brain, and like move us literally from old reptile brain into, to prefrontal cortex human brain, is just that very act of, huh, how did you, I wonder how you got that from what I said. Can you say more?
Mhm,
So curiosity.
mhm,
What I would add is a particular interaction that's like three parts, and this is not imago, but it's fast and it's
mhm,
simple. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's simple.
mhm,
But it's when you find yourself in a complaint, in a yeah, getting triggered, activated. First, this assumes that you've calmed yourself down a little. And if you haven't, then try to with the time alone or the breathing, whatever. Um, but it's first, it's there's three parts. It's phenomenon, story, and feeling. So the phenomenon being a phenomenon is what actually happened. That any 10 people could look at and say, yep, that's what happened. Not your story about what happened, but the thing that happened.
mhm,
So, and people, this is tricky and takes a little bit of discernment and training, is to not say, when you completely ignored me a minute ago, that's total story. The phenomenon is, I notice you've been silent. You haven't said anything for about the past 10 minutes, in spite of me, even though I said a couple things to
mhm,
you.
mhm.
The story, so that's the phenomenon, and
Right.
that doesn't trigger the other person. That's just fact. There's no judgment. It's judgment free. Then comes the story I'm making up about it is, you're ignoring me,
Mhm,
or that I did something to piss you off,
mhm,
or you don't like me. So that's what I'm coming up with, in response to which comes number three, the feeling, which
mhm,
is I'm starting to feel defensive, like, well, if I did something wrong and I know I didn't, then hell with you. It's um, that my feeling. I'm not saying to say all that stuff. Just you can describe the feeling as I'm feeling defensive. I'm feeling uh, angry. And since anger is usually a secondary feeling, let me look deeper. I think I'm feeling hurt and rejected. So can I check out with you what's going on for you?
mhm,
That's essentially it. It's like the phenomenon, the story I made up, and the way it makes me feel. And can you tell me what's going on for you?
mhm,
Um, those three can be very powerful. Like I said, it's simple, but it's not easy, because when you're reactive, you want to jump right into the story, and those stories are so destructive.
mhm. And the stories come from a lifetime of hurt and trauma for most people. And most people, as we've talked about before, have
Mm-hmm.
experienced different types of trauma in their life that are, we're all coming into it with baggage and trauma and hurt and unmet needs and wounds from our past. And those are part of our stories. And so that's a lot deeper to get into, but again, just being kind and patient, that we all create stories and they all come from
Mm-hmm.
hurt, because we can't escape hurt in our life. No matter who we are, it's going to come for all of us at some point.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
I like to look at it from a trauma informed lens, as well as the reason this is so hard. And it's not, of course we can intellectually hear this and be like, yeah, great, I'm going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason it's so hard is because all of us are hurt and wounded and are
Yeah,
protecting ourselves. It's all about protecting ourselves from hurt.
yeah. And the
So,
more the wound, the greater the wound, and the earlier the wound,
mhm,
usually the more, what's the word, painfully and hurtfully it shows up.
mhm,
Because often for some people, and this has really clicked for some of my couples and individuals, when you're just confused and just feel like you have to explode, and you can't even verbalize it to the person, it's probably the wound that's being activated is so old it was pre-verbal. I
mhm,
mean, it may have been really, really what we call in our field early wounding, um, which you don't even have words for yet. You just go into a
mhm.
wild state of
Yeah,
accusation or contempt or criticism.
yeah.
Um,
And trauma is all stored in the body. So
exactly.
reactions to trauma are not even conscious, they just
Yeah.
happen. They can be triggered by the smallest thing, and you're not even aware of the overwhelming feeling that's rushing through where exactly it's coming from. It's usually coming from a past trauma. So,
Yeah. And so the back to our earlier strategy of wait. If you feel it, if you're getting a strong charge in your body, wait, you know, chill out, self-regulate, and I'll get to the breathing thing shortly, and then bring it up. And so people that I'm intimate with in the past will have an agreement. If I'm feeling that, I have a code, which is I'm feeling reactive. I think I shouldn't talk about it right now,
mhm.
and I'll be back. So to
Right.
let the person know you're too upset to speak, but you're not disappearing forever. But when you're really feeling wounded, it's very hard to be vulnerable. It's very hard to say, I'm feeling hurt and I need a hug, at least for me. But
Mhm.
to be able to say, I'm in a reaction, I should probably, I can tell it won't go well if I speak about it. So I'm going to take some time, and I'll be back.
Mhm.
And for me, that may be 12 hours. And maybe the next day if I'm really, really triggered by something. For
Mhm.
some people, it's 10 minutes, it's 15 minutes. But that's, I think, have a code with your partner that when you're getting activated, you can say it.
Yeah. And for some high conflict couples, the person who fears that abandonment, it's very hard for them, and they may not trust that the person's going to come back because that in
Yeah,
the past, what they're used to is things just being brushed under the rug and never talked about again until they just forget about it, but it's still there.
yeah,
So, that's another kind of hard thing about this is that sometimes with certain couples, there's not that trust that even if the partner does say,
mm,
give me 36 hours, the other partner who fears that abandonment or
mm.
really hates
Yeah,
that silence space it really feels like they can't trust that that person
mm,
will come back. So I feel like there's a lot of, at least with a lot of the couples I worked with, it takes a lot of time for them to be able to trust, to practice it so much when they know, okay, one, I can tolerate the anxiety of sitting without, because a lot of people just they want to fix it before they go to bed. They want to fix it right away, but their partner's not ready. They're in that reptilian brain for a while. And
yeah,
so, one, the anxious person there has to, that type of anxiety anyway, because both people have anxiety, it just looks different.
mm,
But the person who's anxious about that disconnection learns through practice and lots of practice that one, that they can tolerate the anxiety, and two, after enough times of seeing that their partner can come back and revisit it, then they start to trust it more. But this
what
stuff
you're
is really hard.
absolutely. I'm glad you said that because for the partner, and if some of you have heard us talk about the tiger and the turtle, or the minimizer and the maximizer. Um, but it's the turtle that tends to need to go away and lick their wounds, and it's really important for that person, whoever's taking the time out, to mean it and to follow up. If they say, "I'll be back," damn
Mhm.
it, you better come back. Don't
Yeah.
leave the person hanging forever. And you don't have to give it. You don't have to say, "I'll be back in 10 minutes." But if you do know, say, I'll take a run, then I'll talk, or I just need to calm down. And believe me, I'll let you know as soon as I calm down. And to do that, because otherwise it's really wounding, as you said, for the person who feels so much anxiety about the silence or the separation.
Mhm. Yeah. I also wanted to just add that, again, where this stuff is very difficult, that we're talking about,
Mhm.
that it takes a lot of practice. It's not skills that we all usually are born with. It's not skills that are taught to us most of the time. So really hard, but we're also, you know, we're not talking about the more darker or serious part of this, which is that domestic violence is way up since the quarantine, and there's, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse.
You know,
Um, and this conversation does not apply to that because, you
no.
know, one of my specialties is working in this area, and a lot of the times abusers cannot do this work. And you may not feel safe. And that is a whole different conversation of what your strategies are to be safe as you can be when locked in a place with an abuser. So just to make that clear that we didn't address that, that this type of thing is not something you're going to be able to do with someone who's seriously abusive, even just emotionally abusive or verbally abusive.
Yeah.
This is not something that necessarily will get through to people like that. So
No,
that's a whole other challenge that we have not been able to get into today.
And just quickly, if any of you listening or seeing this are in a relationship that's physically abusive, there's House of Ruth, there's the domestic violence hotline. Some of these are national, and then there are some local. But if you Google domestic abuse, you'll get immediate resources that you should call, and they will talk to you. And they will help you, even if you need to plan a getaway. It will help you do that. So find help if it's that kind of severe.
Or having one safe person that you trust, that if you can somehow communicate to them that they need to call on your behalf or that something is unsafe.
Yeah.
But yeah, the shelters and the hotlines are all open now, even during the quarantine. So.
Yeah, and just to validate that a lot of that's going on. This is bringing out a lot of well, for people that for abusive relationships, it's worse in a quarantine, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, the numbers are way up with domestic violence and abuse right now.
Yeah,
and a lot of people cannot escape their abusers and don't have options that they feel like they can go anywhere. And so this is a really, really serious issue that I just wanted to flag, for people who do feel really hopeless and unsafe right now, that there's not much you can do to reason with an abusive person, that they have to be able to get help, and you're not going to be able to do it.
So I know we're reaching the end of our time, if not there already. Any final tips? You mentioned, a lot of people, one of the biggest conflicts in couples quarantine, couples in COVID, is sexual frequency of sex. Any ideas, wisdom, tips that you have or have heard of for negotiating that?
I mean, there's so many different things, that I heard one, expert say that sex, releases oxytocin, and that increases bonding, and couples should be having more sex if possible. But at the same time, given what we said earlier about burnout and, just maybe, having honest conversations about what, the different needs might be for that. And is there a middle ground that you can come to based on the different needs, but being open and communicative about your sexual needs at a time like this, I think is the best advice I can offer.
I would ditto that. Open, communicative, accepting of difference, a willingness to cross the bridge into the other's world, and another tip I've seen and recommend is make sure, because part of what makes couples fight is when we become enmeshed or fused. When the differentiation that work gives us and friends give us, what makes a marriage thrive, I think, is two independent people that are interdependent, but not codependent, not fused, not enmeshed. And so when we get to that, one of the things that quarantine can do is make us kind of glom onto each other. So I think it's a good tip to keep your friendship, like to have, do your Zoom calls, keep your friendships, find some way to hold on to your outside contacts. I don't mean as an escape from the marriage, but to remember there's a you, and there's a you that's married, and there's still a you, or a you in partnership, and still a you, and to cultivate your differentiated self which helps with the mental health, and it also helps with attractiveness and sexuality. You being fused and codependent is kind of a turnoff, but seeing your partner as not you creates a gap or a distance that one wants to close with intimacy. So it's a dance, right?
Mm-hmm. For sure.
The breathing, but I'll just say
Yeah.
that
You can end with that.
yeah, okay. So the breathing technique is this. I'm going to describe it because I can't describe and do at the same time, but there's two, and they're both simple. One is called combat breathing. It's what's given to soldiers when they're literally trembling with fear or anxiety or activation, which is inhale to the count of 4, hold to the count of 4, exhale to the count of 4, and then start again.
Hmm.
And if you mix it up, if inhale, hold, exhale, hold. If you add another hold, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, it's the rhythmic counted breathing. But the classic is inhale to 4, hold to 4, exhale to 4, repeat. The other is even easier and gets a little bit more into mindfulness, but I promise you it works. Mindfulness techniques, meditation, I mean, is just breathe normally. Don't even do anything about your breathing except stay in complete observation of your out breath. So breathe in as normal. Don't do anything particular or on purpose, of normal breathing. And as you breathe out, watch the entire breath. Observe the entire breath. Be aware of the entire out breath. Then hold for 2, and then repeat. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Either of those two, I promise you, will calm you down. And just do it till it happens.
Good to know.
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks for
Lena,
the
thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
You too. I get, one of the nice things about being a therapist and having clients online is I get some of my connection needs met. I
Yeah.
never make my client my parent or anything, but it's nice to actually connect.
Yeah. And I guess our next episode will be about the challenges of singles in COVID.
Yeah.
We'll be discussing that next. So we'll look forward to that.
Okay. Well, have a good day or evening, everybody, depending on when you're viewing this. And Lena, I'll talk to you offline.
Bye.
Goodbye.